What happens when a childhood filled with trauma and isolation twists that desire into something horrifying? Today, we delve into the disturbing story of Joe Metheny, a man who crossed a line so unthinkable, it continues to shock the world even today. Prepare yourselves for a story that will challenge your perception of evil. We're talking about Joe Metheny, the Baltimore Butcher, and the man accused of unthinkable crimes. Chapter 1. Early life and background. In the heart of Baltimore, amidst the crumbling infrastructure and the echo of children's laughter, a young boy named Joe Metheny was growing up. Little did anyone know, within the walls of this seemingly ordinary home, the seeds of a monstrous future were being sown. To understand the making of a monster like Joe Metheny, we must first look at his early life, a journey that began in the gritty streets of Baltimore, Maryland. Joe Roy Metheny was born on March 2nd, 1955. His upbringing was anything but idyllic. Growing up in a poverty-stricken neighborhood, Metheny's childhood was marred by hardship and instability. Metheny's father was an alcoholic who was frequently absent from home. His mother, on the other hand, struggled to provide for him and his 5 siblings. The constant financial strain meant that Joe often went without basic necessities and emotional support. According to neighbors, the Metheny household was chaotic. Joe's mother worked multiple jobs, leaving the children largely unsupervised. The lack of parental guidance and affection had a profound impact on young Joe, planting the seeds of resentment and anger that would later explode in unimaginable ways. As Joe Metheny entered his teenage years, his life took a further downward spiral. He struggled academically and socially, often getting into trouble at school. His behavior became increasingly erratic, and he was known to lash out violently at classmates. At the age of 14, Metheny faced a devastating blow. His father died in a car accident. This tragedy pushed him deeper into a state of emotional turmoil. His mother, now the sole provider, found it even more challenging to manage the household and keep Joe in line. In a bid to escape his troubled home life, Metheny enlisted in the United States Army when he turned 18. The military provided him with structure and discipline, but it was also during this time that he began experimenting with drugs. His service records indicate that he served overseas, but details about his specific assignments remain unclear. After being discharged from the Army, Metheny returned to Baltimore. His hopes for a fresh start were quickly dashed as he found himself unable to hold down a job or maintain stable relationships. His drug use escalated, and he drifted into a life of transient labor and homelessness. By the late 1980s, Metheny had become a fixture in Baltimore's underworld. He worked various low-paying jobs, including truck driving and forklift operating. However, his addiction to crack cocaine and heroin often left him broke and desperate. It was during this period that Metheny's behavior grew increasingly violent and erratic. He frequented bars and homeless shelters, searching for his next fix and often getting into altercations. Friends and acquaintances described him as a large, intimidating man with a volatile temper. Chapter 2. The First Kill. Just as a single pebble can send ripples across a tranquil pond, Joe Metheny's first kill set off a wave of unimaginable violence that would forever disturb the lives of many. This initial act of brutality was the catalyst for a series of horrific events, each more shocking than the last. The story of Joe Metheny's first kill is one rooted in rage, desperation, and an insatiable need for revenge. It was a hot summer night in 1994 when Metheny's life took a turn for the worse, setting him on a path of unimaginable horror. Joe Metheny returned home one evening to find his girlfriend and their 6-year-old son missing. Already struggling with addiction and anger issues, this was the final straw for Metheny. He believed that his girlfriend had left him for another man and taken their child with her. Fueled by a potent mix of drugs and alcohol, Metheny embarked on a frantic search across Baltimore, desperate to find his girlfriend and son. He scoured the city's darkest corners, interrogating anyone he believed might have information. His search eventually led him to a homeless encampment under a bridge, a place where he suspected his girlfriend might be hiding. Under the bridge, Metheny encountered 2 homeless men, Randall Brewer and Randy Piker. In his drug-fueled haze, he became convinced that these men knew the whereabouts of his girlfriend and son. Metheny's interrogation quickly turned violent. Metheny attacked Brewer and Piker with an axe he had brought along, striking them down in a fit of uncontrollable rage. The brutality of the attack left both men dead, their blood pooling beneath the bridge. This savage act of violence marked the beginning of Metheny's killing spree, driven by a delusional need for revenge and a deep-seated anger towards those he deemed responsible for his suffering. In the aftermath of the murders, Metheny attempted to cover his tracks. He hid the bodies of Brewer and Piker, hoping to avoid detection by the authorities. However, the sheer brutality of the crime made it impossible for the bodies to remain hidden for long. The bodies were discovered shortly after the murders, but at that time, Metheny had already moved on, continuing his search for his girlfriend and son. The police initially had no leads on the perpetrator of the heinous crime under the bridge. The murders of Brewer and Piker did not bring Metheny any closer to finding his family. Instead, they marked the beginning of a dark descent into further violence and depravity. Metheny's rage was not satiated. If anything, it intensified his need to inflict pain and suffering. With each passing day, Metheny grew more desperate and more violent. His encounters with others during this period were marked by aggression and threats, as he became increasingly unhinged. The killings under the bridge were just the beginning, a prelude to the horrors that would follow. Experts who have studied Metheny's case point to the murders of Brewer and Piker as a critical turning point. Dr. Jane Thompson, a criminal psychologist, explains that this initial act of violence provided Metheny with a twisted sense of power and control elements that had been sorely lacking in his life. Dr. Thompson: Joe Metheny's first kill was driven by a potent mix of personal vendetta and psychological instability. The rage he felt towards his girlfriend was redirected towards these two men, and the act of killing them gave him a brief, albeit perverse, sense of satisfaction and empowerment. Chapter 3: Subsequent Murders. As Joe Metheny chillingly admitted, after the first, it was like a drug. I couldn't stop. This haunting revelation foreshadowed a series of subsequent murders that spiraled into an increasingly horrific spree, each crime more brutal than the last, driven by a growing insatiable hunger for violence. This initial taste of blood awakened something dark within Joe. But this was just the beginning. Joe's thirst for violence grew, and his methods became more gruesome. He began targeting vulnerable people, such as sex workers and the homeless, drawing them to outlying areas before brutally murdering them. Once inside his trailer, Joe would overpower his victims, often tying them up to prevent their escape. His brutality knew no bounds. He would beat, strangle, and stab his victims before finally killing them. His victims were often marginalized individuals, people who wouldn't be missed immediately. This made it easier for Metheny to continue his horrifying acts without drawing attention to himself. The aftermath of Joe Metheny's first murders marked the beginning of a blood-soaked chapter in Baltimore's history. The brutal slayings of Randall Brewer and Randy Piker under the bridge were just the tip of the iceberg. Metheny's insatiable thirst for violence would soon claim more lives. Although the bodies of Brewer and Piker were quickly discovered by the authorities, there were no immediate leads on the killer. The police had little evidence to go on, and Metheny, confident in his ability to evade capture, continued his downward spiral. In the months following the initial murders, Metheny attempted to maintain a facade of normalcy. He took on various blue-collar jobs, including as a forklift driver and a trucker. However, behind this veneer, he was constantly plotting his next move. Kathy Ann Magaziner. In 1994, shortly after the murders under the bridge, Metheny's next known victim was Kathy Ann Magaziner, a 39-year-old sex worker. Metheny met Magaziner at a local bar and lured her to his trailer with promises of drugs. Once inside, Metheny's demeanor changed drastically. He attacked Magaziner, strangling her to death with his bare hands. The ferocity of the attack was shocking, as Metheny vented his pent-up rage and frustration on his helpless victim. After killing her, Metheny dismembered Magaziner's body, burying her remains in a shallow grave on his property. Kimberly Spicer. Metheny's killing spree continued into 1995. Kimberly Spicer, a 26-year-old woman, became his next victim. Like many others, Spicer was lured to Metheny's trailer under the guise of drugs and a safe place to stay. Inside the trailer, Metheny's true intentions became horrifyingly clear. He attacked Spicer, brutally stabbing her to death. The confined space of the trailer turned into a chamber of horrors, echoing with her desperate cries for help. Metheny dismembered Spicer's body, hiding her remains in various locations around his trailer. The dismemberment served not only to dispose of the evidence, but also seemed to give Metheny a twisted sense of satisfaction and control over his victims even in death. Tony Lynn and Gracia. By late 1996, Metheny had claimed several more lives, each kill following a disturbingly similar pattern. His final known victim was Tony Lynn and Gracia, a young woman who crossed paths with Metheny under tragic circumstances. Metheny offered Ingracia a ride, preying on her vulnerability, promising her a warm meal and a place to rest. He lured her back to his trailer. Once there, Metheny revealed his monstrous nature. Metheny attacked Ingracia with a brutality that had become his signature. He strangled her, watching the life drain from her eyes, and then proceeded to dismember her body. This methodical violence was a chilling hallmark of his killings. Chapter 4. Gruesome act of cannibalism, selling the special burgers. What if the burger you just enjoyed was made from something far more sinister than beef? As Joe Metheny served his special burgers to unsuspecting customers, a chilling question loomed. How many had unwittingly consumed the flesh of human beings, forever altering their lives with a single, horrifying bite? Joe Metheny's series of brutal murders reached a level of grotesque horror that few could ever imagine. His most gruesome act wasn't just about taking lives, it was about desecrating his victims in a way that shocked and repulsed society to its core. Metheny, a seemingly ordinary man, operated a small barbecue stand in Baltimore's industrial district. The community knew him as a friendly face offering hearty meals to truckers and locals. But behind this facade lay a monstrous secret. Metheny's modus operandi was as methodical as it was horrifying. After luring his victims, often vulnerable individuals like sex workers and homeless people, to his trailer with promises of drugs or shelter, he would murder them in cold blood. The brutality of these killings was shocking, but what he did next was beyond comprehension. After the initial murder, Metheny would dismember the bodies with a disturbing sense of precision. He used various tools to butcher the remains, separating the flesh from the bone. This gruesome task was carried out in the confines of his trailer, which had essentially become a macabre butcher shop. Metheny then took the dismembered flesh and ground it up, mixing it with animal meat. This horrifying concoction was then formed into burger patties. The act of turning his victims into food was not just a method of disposal, it was an act of ultimate control. This act of cannibalism was not just about disposing of the bodies. For Metheny, it was a sick game of power and control. By feeding human flesh to the public, he was asserting his dominance over both his victims and society at large. Joe Metheny's gruesome culinary endeavor involved the meticulous preparation and sale of special burgers made from a blend of human flesh and animal meat. Operating a makeshift barbecue stand in Baltimore's industrial district, Metheny grilled these burgers and sold them to unsuspecting customers, including truckers and locals. His stand, which seemed to offer a simple, hearty meal, became the front for his horrifying scheme. The patrons, unaware of the true contents of their food, consumed these tainted burgers, unknowingly participating in Metheny's grotesque ritual. Chapter 5. Capture and Confession. You know it's a bad day at work when your lunch break involves a confession to cannibalism. Joe Metheny's capture was anything but ordinary. His chilling confession came with a nonchalance that was as bizarre as it was horrifying, turning a routine arrest into one of the most unsettling cases of modern crime. Joe Metheny's horrifying spree came to an end on a dark, cold night in December 1996. His downfall began with a woman named Rita Kemper, who would become the key to his capture. Metheny had lured Kemper to his trailer with promises of drugs. Once inside, his demeanor shifted from friendly to menacing. He attacked her. attempting to overpower and restrain her. But Kemper fought back with a desperate strength born of sheer survival instinct. Kemper managed to escape from Metheny's clutches. Fleeing into the freezing night, barefoot and terrified, she ran to a nearby road where she flagged down a passing truck driver who took her to the nearest police station. At the station, Kemper recounted her harrowing ordeal. Her detailed description of Metheny and the location of his trailer prompted immediate action from the Baltimore Police Department. Officers were dispatched to arrest Metheny and investigate his property. The police surrounded Metheny's trailer, catching him off guard. He was arrested without incident, but what they found inside the trailer would shock even the most seasoned detectives. Inside, investigators discovered evidence of Metheny's grisly crimes, bloodstains, weapons, and dismembered body parts stored in freezers. Metheny was taken into custody and brought to the station for questioning. During his interrogation, Joe Metheny showed a chilling lack of remorse. In fact, he seemed almost eager to recount his horrific acts. He confessed to multiple murders, providing graphic details that left investigators horrified. "I killed them because I enjoyed it. I had a rush. I got a high out of it. I had no real excuse why other than I liked to do it." Metheny admitted to luring his victims, often vulnerable individuals like sex workers and homeless people, promising them drugs or shelter. Once he had them in his grasp, he would overpower, torture, and eventually kill them. "I cut up their meat and put it in some Tupperware bowls, then put it in a freezer. I opened up a little open pit beef stand. I had real roast beef and pork sandwiches, and why not? They were very good." Metheny's most shocking confession was his method of disposing of the bodies. He revealed that he mixed the flesh of his victims with animal meat and sold it as burgers from his roadside barbecue stand. The realization that innocent customers had unwittingly consumed human flesh was almost too horrific to comprehend. The news of Metheny's arrest and his gruesome confessions spread like wildfire. The public was horrified, and the families of the victims were devastated by the grotesque details of their loved ones' deaths. Metheny's lack of remorse and his matter-of-fact recounting of his crimes only added to the horror. In court, Metheny maintained his chilling composure, describing his actions in graphic detail. His confessions and the overwhelming evidence against him left no doubt about his guilt. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring he would never harm anyone again. Chapter 6: Aftermath and Psychological Analysis. As I looked through the grim details of Joe Metheny's case, a chilling thought crossed my mind. How does one make sense of such horror? The aftermath of Metheny's crimes was not just a matter of legal proceedings and media frenzy. It was deeply personal, impacting everyone who had to confront the darkness he unleashed. Joe Metheny's arrest and the subsequent revelations of his crimes sent shockwaves through the community and law enforcement. When Metheny was finally apprehended, the gruesome details of his murders and the chilling confession of his cannibalistic practices left even the most seasoned investigators horrified. To understand Metheny's actions, criminal psychologists delved into his background and psyche. Metheny's childhood was marked by neglect, abuse, and instability. Raised in a dysfunctional family, he experienced severe emotional and physical trauma, which contributed to his development of deep-seated rage and antisocial behavior. These early experiences laid the foundation for his later actions, as he sought to exert control and inflict suffering on others. Metheny's actions were driven by a combination of deep-rooted anger, a desire for control, and a complete lack of empathy. His decision to turn his victims into food was not only a means of disposing of their bodies, but also a way to assert dominance over society. His psychological profile revealed a man who found perverse pleasure in the suffering of others. His actions were not merely about killing, but about creating a sense of power and invincibility. By incorporating his victims into food and serving it to the public, he was performing an ultimate act of desecration, turning human beings into mere objects to be consumed and discarded. The aftermath of Joe Metheny's crimes left a lasting impact on the community and raised questions about the psychological factors that drove him to commit such heinous acts. Experts have pointed to his traumatic childhood, substance abuse, and possible undiagnosed mental disorders as contributing factors. Metheny's need for control and his ability to compartmentalize his actions suggest a deeply disturbed mind. His case remains a subject of study for criminal profilers seeking to understand the psyche of serial killers. Chapter 7. Life in Prison and Death. What does life look like for a man who has committed such heinous acts and is now confined within 4 cold walls? As Joe Metheny faced his days in prison, a haunting question lingered. How does one reconcile a life of monstrous deeds with the stark reality of incarceration and, ultimately, death? After the horrors of Joe Metheny's crimes were revealed, his life took a dramatic turn behind bars. Imprisoned for life without the possibility of parole, Metheny faced the reality of a confined existence, leaving behind a legacy of terror that would never be forgotten. Joe Metheny was sentenced to life imprisonment in 1997. His new home became a maximum security prison, where he would spend the remainder of his days. Known for his gruesome crimes, Metheny was placed under strict surveillance, ensuring he posed no threat to other inmates or himself. Metheny's cell was a stark contrast to the chaotic life he once led. The limited space and lack of freedom were constant reminders of his actions and their consequences. Despite the isolation, Metheny seemed to adapt to prison life with a disturbing ease. Reports from prison staff described him as a model prisoner, compliant with rules and regulations, which was unsettling given the brutality of his past. Among the inmate population, Metheny's notoriety preceded him. His fellow prisoners were both fascinated and repelled by his crimes. Some inmates avoided him entirely, while others sought him out, curious about the man who had committed such heinous acts. Despite the occasional altercation, Metheny managed to navigate the complex social dynamics of prison life relatively unscathed. In the confines of his cell, Metheny had ample time for reflection. He kept a journal where he wrote about his life, his crimes, and his thoughts on humanity. These writings offered a glimpse into the mind of a man who, despite his monstrous actions, displayed moments of introspection and remorse. However, the sincerity of these reflections was always in question. Metheny also took part in various prison work programs, engaging in menial tasks that provided a semblance of purpose in his otherwise monotonous existence. These activities, though mundane, were a stark contrast to his past life of violence and depravity. As the years passed, Metheny's health began to decline. The harsh conditions of prison life took their toll, exacerbating underlying health issues. He made frequent visits to the prison infirmary, where he was treated for various ailments. Despite the medical care, his condition continued to deteriorate. On August 5, 2017, Joe Metheny was found unresponsive in his cell. Prison staff attempted to revive him, but their efforts were in vain. Metheny was pronounced dead at the scene. The cause of death was officially listed as natural causes, marking the end of a life steeped in brutality and horror. His story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of darkness, and a call to action to ensure that such evil is never allowed to flourish. As we close the video on Joe Metheny's horrifying tale, one question remains. What drives a person to such unimaginable depths of depravity? And how can we protect ourselves from such darkness in our own world?
The 62-year-old was serving 2 life sentences without parole for kidnapping, sexual assault, and 2 counts of murder.
If you found this story as gripping and unsettling as we did, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Crazy Context Animation for more intriguing and chilling content. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a video, and leave a comment below with your thoughts or suggestions for future topics. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned.